Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to make these cute, colorful robots, and I've got lots of tips for you in this video. This video is brought to you by TopFlightStamps.com. They bring the best stamps from all over the world to us here in the United States, where we can find them all in one place. Now don't worry, I'm going to write all these tips down in my blog post, so you don't have to try to scramble and write it down as I'm going. So the first tip you just saw a second ago is to dust your paper with cornstarch before you begin stamping. And I just used a pouch of cotton that I sewed myself and put a scoop of cornstarch in it, but you can also buy those if you don't want to make it yourself. Now I'm stamping with a black pigment ink, Versafine Onyx Black. I find that I get a really great impression with that, and I like to use these curved blocks anytime I have a really detailed stamp, because it seems to make the stamp just touch the paper in every little nook and cranny, and I get a perfect image. This is a mega mount, but there's also rocket blocks, and I will link those down below as well in case that's something that you may find useful. Now if you've ever had an issue where you're coloring your images either with paint or markers and your ink bleeds but you're not sure why because you can't remember what ink to use, here's a simple solution. Heat emboss your image, and that way your ink will not go anywhere. It won't budge, and it gives you the extra benefit of making little ridges on your design on the lines so that you'll stay within the lines when you color. Because you see, when I heat up this embossing powder, it turns clear so you know it's done, but it also dries embossed or bumpy. So when you go to color, your pen tips are going to stay where you want them to be. So if you have a shaky hand, or maybe you're in a hurry and you're afraid that you're going to mess it up, the embossing will really help there. Now I cut all of my images out with my scan and cut machine. I find that embossing my images really helps the scanner on the scan and cut machine recognize the edges. And with a stamp with such fine detailed lines, I figured I could use all the help that I could get. And I decided to cut them out first before I colored them, because that way if my machine didn't recognize it and didn't cut well, then I wouldn't spend all kinds of time coloring it and then having to cut it out by hand afterwards. Or sometimes people have said that the scan and cut machines could cut through an image. I haven't had that happen on my scan and cut, but it makes sense to, cut it before you do all the work of coloring. And I just stuck it onto a post-it note, onto the sticky stuff on the post-it note, so I could hold it while I cut it. Because otherwise, it could be really difficult to hold that tiny little image while you're trying to cut it. So just stick it down on top of a post-it note and you'll be good to go. Now another tip for blending, if you're coloring a really tiny area and you don't have a lot of room to, do all your lights and then layer up each color, do your darks first and then do your mediums and then your lights. Working dark to light will let you blend out easily in a small area like this. In fact, that's how I usually color. I wanted the gray areas to be kind of streaky like metal, so I didn't try to blend those. I kind of layered those up. But when you want to blend image, try dark, medium, light. Go in that order and you should be good. And I'm working on Nina cardstock, the Nina Classic Crest cardstock, because I find that it blends really well. It's not too expensive either if you buy it by the ream, and it lasts a long time. So another tip I have is to look at your stamps and your stencils with new eyes. Now this was an older stamp set that I had, this one by Indigo Blue, and I thought it had a couple great background stamps, so I decided to put those on mounts and just set them aside so I would have them as I'm working on my background panels, because I'm not using any pattern paper here. So another tip, and if you want a video on this, let me know in the comments below, is to make your own ink pads. If you have like a discontinued ink pad and you can't get a re-inker for it and it's all dried up, instead of throwing it away, try making your own inks with glycerin and pearl powders or gouache paint, things like that you have lying around. You can make some really cool stuff that nobody else is going to have, and it will be completely unique. Now to get a rusty texture, I'm going to use a product called a baked texture embossing powder. Embossing powders come in all sorts of finishes, and you can even mix and match them, mix them together in small amounts and make your own textured embossing powder. But this one is already done if you like. This is the Seth Apter one from Emerald Creek. It's called Rust, and it has a bit of flocking in it, which is like that material that you might use to, like if you stamped an Easter bunny and you want it to be fluffy, you'd coat it with glue and then you'd sprinkle flocking on. Well, that's kind of in this embossing powder, and when you heat it up, it gives you a rusty texture. Now I wanted it to have the look of kind of patina, how things that gets left outside gets that kind of greenish rust on there. So I sponged on some green ink, some homemade ink again, and then I inked the edges with some gold metallic ink. And actually all of these ink pads I'm using today are all ones that I literally dug them out of the trash, because I'm like, why am I keeping these dried up ink pads? I chucked them, and then I had an idea, so I yanked them out of the ink pad the trash can, and I started putting paints and Pearl-Ex and all sorts of different things on there and making my own inks. And you know what? It was fun to make the ink pads, and it was real fun to use them, and I didn't have to worry about wasting anything precious because I literally dug it out of the trash. So think about giving old supplies new life. When you think they're used up, sometimes they're not really. Sometimes you can revamp them. So I find that using a bunch of different kinds of inks and then coating it with clear embossing powder gave me a very cool metallic look. And I can keep sponging on ink. In fact, I find if I've got an embossed design like this, using my finger to apply ink just I can really get it down into the nooks and crannies. And it also helps it wipe off from the raised images. I can kind of push the ink down into the crannies, and then I can wipe off the stuff off the embossed areas. So it just gives us that extra level of interesting inky goodness. Now, back to those stamps. Now, this is a stamp set that I honestly kind of forgot about, but I was looking through my folder of steampunky robot-y stamps because I keep my stamps all organized in binders by theme. I thought, boy, those are really interesting textures, and I think they would look really good on this card. And by stamping it imperfectly, like maybe stamping it and then stamping it again without re-inking it, I get this really grungy effect. I wanted to keep my background fairly simple, but I didn't want just a plain white card because I didn't think it really went. So I'm using the same inks that I used on the black cardstock, but look how different they look on the white cardstock. It almost looks kind of light and fresh and springy, but I'm still carrying that grungy vintage motif over. So it just gives you a whole new look, but everything coordinates because I use the same inks on everything. So kind of keep that in mind. If you're feeling like you create a card and it's just a big hot mess and nothing goes, just keep reusing the same products in new ways, and you'll get enough of that kind of cross-pollination happening with all your materials that it will work. Now, I recommend investing in kind of generic supplies to start, especially if you're new. So things like your good quality cardstock, like heavyweight cardstock, brads, like these screw top brads here, they look like the tops of a screw. Those will go good on kids' birthday cards, on cards for men, on Father's Day cards, on anything where you have like an industrial steampunk look to it. They're going to work really well. So they're a little decorative, they're a little fun, but they're also generic enough that you can use them again. Same thing with embossing folders. You can ink them up with different colors, different inks. You could use paint on them, like after you've embossed the paper, and get different looks. So try to think more in generic terms as you're building your stash, because it will really make for very versatile products. Now, if you want that little hint of pattern, something I recommend is washi tape. It's very inexpensive. You get little bits and smatterings of it because it comes in a roll, and I find it's wonderful because it's self-adhesive and it's just the perfect touch, and you don't have to cut into a big piece of pattern paper, because sometimes this is ridiculous. I had so much paper, but I would hate to cut into a full sheet just to get a little bit for a card. But with washi tape, that's all you have is little bits, and it's just perfect for decorating a card. Like maybe you mismeasured your cardstock and it doesn't quite reach all the way to the bottom of your card. You could put a strip of washi tape and no one's gonna know. It's just a fun little accent, and you could decorate your envelopes with it. It's just kind of fun. Now, those little brads that I had came in a grab bag. They were all video game themed, and I held on to those for probably 10 years, and I finally had a use for them. And I decided, since I'm making a batch of cards, it's a good opportunity to use it all up. So that's another tip. Instead of just making one card, make a batch, and that way you can use a full pack of specialty embellishments if you happen to have a pack. That way they don't just kind of linger and hang around and not get used. And you'll always need a birthday card or a get well card or something like that, where you could use a fun theme like this. I'm not putting sentiments on these cards because I figured that I could use them for different events. Like if I wanted to just send my nephew, just a card to brighten his day, because what kid doesn't like to get mail, I can send him one of these, and it doesn't have to be a big deal. So if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. To find the stamps I used, please visit topflightstamps.com. I'll have all of these supplies linked up in the video description, and I hope it inspires you to make some cards today. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.